Hello, everyone. My name is Girish. Welcome to the fifth edition of the Data Summit 2030. I'm very excited to be here to have this small talk with you guys. And I have been listening to very many other speakers so far. It has been wonderful, inspiring sessions from my side, at least, that I have really been motivated. Hope you guys have felt the same. So just to get started, I work for a company which is 331 years old, one of the oldest that I know that exists on planet today. And what it tells is that, and you of course see the name of the company down there, Husqvarna. And what it tells, one thing, it might mean many different things to different people, but I think what it means to me is that if you will see, this company has transformed itself not once, not twice, but many times in the past. From guns to sewing machines, to motorcycles, to chainsaws, to robotics. But what you will see here is that of lately, more and more digital solutions have started to come in. So one thing which is also striking in this journey is that we at Husqvarna has been primarily a product-driven business model-oriented company. We have been selling products. That's what we have basically been doing. But now with the advent of digital technologies, we are not only seeing the shift towards servitization, but also a shift towards data-driven servitization. And that is quite a big challenge. And that is actually, I would say, one of the main topics for me today to talk about is data. And when we talk about data, sorry, I had some struggles to move the slides, but when we talk about data, data is core in this journey of data-driven servitization that I just referred to before. From many aspects. For example, one of the aspects, of course, is do we have the required amount of data that we need in order to achieve our ambitions with data-driven services? And that means, do we have connected products? Do we have the customer data? Do we have our sales data? Can we combine different data sets together and so on? Do we have processes to not only capture but also iterate upon these data sets? Then if you have data, do you have the right quality? And there are so many things. And then there are also the soft aspects. Do we treat, as an organization, do we treat data as an asset? Or do we take that as a cost, for example? Do we have a data culture when it comes to data-driven decisions, for example? Does our leadership really believe and entrust data to take decisions? And for all of this to happen, which is tying back to our ambitions, to the strategy of the companies these days, and particularly for Husqvarna, within data-driven services, one of the core ideas and one of the core contributors towards that for me and for us at Husqvarna, we believe, is the governance. How are we setting up governance in organization, in processes, in quality, in approaches, in leadership, in everything around data in the entire organization? And that is the topic for me to talk about today. So sorry, I did not take time to present myself. I did refer my name. So my full name is Girish Agarwal. I'm responsible for the AI lab at Husqvarna Group, which is a global organization. And at the same time, I'm also a researcher at KTH. And my research has always been around business model innovation impacted by different technologies. And of lately, of course, I am contributing or looking deeper into artificial intelligence technology in specific. But coming back to the topic which I raised, disrupting the governance or disrupting data through the governance. And that is something that we have learned at Husqvarna, that when we formulated this lab, the whole idea for the lab was that how can this lab give us the required wings, give us the required acceleration, and give us the required enablement that we need in order to have our data-driven ambitions, succeed. And for that, we needed a center of excellence site of a setup, wherein our resources, wherein our processes, wherein our approach and the ideas and the technology outlooks that we want to execute from future technology perspective can be done quite quickly in an iterative, agile fashion. And then we can foster this thinking from the lab down into the organizations. So the idea was never to have this lab dedicated for years. Yes, we can do lab for some other technology, but for the data technology, foster these thinkings, when I said from approach, mindset, governance, structure perspective, and then dissipate it within the division so that it becomes normal business as soon as possible. That has been the objective of the lab. And yes, of course, it has been a journey, I think, and I will, of course, touch upon one aspect of that journey today, which is the governance part of the data that we learned about. I don't know if you are aware, but this building that you see is actually the Library of the Congress, which is supposed to be the biggest library on planet today. And just to give you, and I think I'm talking to all the technologists in here, so I do not have to really get into the depth of this one, but exabyte is a big, big number. And it's just to give you the magnitude, all the books, all the knowledge in this library multiplied by 100,000 would probably give you that much of storage in terms of exabytes. And on internet in 2016, back then, 1100 of exabyte actually went through. And after that, they said they stopped tracking the number because it was way too much. And just to give you another indication on the data side, which really boggles me, that when we landed Apollo mission on Moon, of course, there were many programmable units and control units in there. But one of the main control units that we had in that module that landed had a size of 6 MB. And that's really tremendous if we compare it with how far the technology has gone today. Probably 10% of some games that we use today, for example, on our mobile phones. And the same data today is being utilized in all aspects of our life. And one can, I will actually interchangeably use the data technologies and artificial intelligence in my presentation today a little. And we can debate about that maybe some other time, but I really believe that, for example, to exploit AI technology, you need data. And then there are many aspects of data. Without that, AI technology, to be honest, can never reap you the benefits and insights that it is bound to give you, for example, in terms of anomaly detection, preventive maintenance, or even natural language generation, or natural language processing, or edge computing, or whatever you want to call it, pattern recognition, classifications, predictions, or whatever. You need data for that. And today we see that we are not talking about all of these things to be happening in future. We see that we have to govern and control this data today because it's all around us. Waking up through alarm clocks of today's who are having a watch over the night of how did we sleep, for example, based on all the data points through all the different sensors, the Fitbit watches, all the security and safety solutions that we have in our houses, all this automation that we are talking about, self-driven cars. We have seen Microsoft launching various kinds of online solutions which are machine learned, AI based, for example, scheduling your meetings, predicting the meeting behavior of people. We have these, I spoke about Fitbits, not only for training, but also to keep control of what you are eating, how you are eating, monitors from health perspective, shopping, Spotify, and the list just goes on and on and on. So all these companies and all these industries, I would say, are looking into the data. And of course, the data is exploding quite a lot. But one also important thing is that uh, if you see, go back and see that how the technology has been moving. And for me, I would say it has been going in kind of circles. We had this centralized mainframe systems back in 1960s and 70s, which then was taken up by ERP systems and CRM systems in 80s to 2000s, where the client server architecture became quite prominent. And then in the early 2000s, we had back again the cloud-based, centralized mobile structures of cloud computing. And then now we are again talking about edge intelligence, which is again a bit more distributed. So over the time, as technology takes many turns, sometimes we take U-turns and goes in circle, but one thing is evident, that the data today is generated out of these granular reusable components called microservices. And that is really important and to understand that that is the reason why we are able to collate different kinds and generate different kinds of data sets. And that's why we are in a situation here where traditional governance modules of data or different or traditional governance standards do not work anymore, because we have data from different data sources, different data sets, their metadata is different, their structures are different, and so on. And microservices has given us an impetus in that area. And we at Husqvarna actually have had a similar structure. We created our Husqvarna Group Service Cloud, the backend platform, which is the basis for all the digital solutions and services that we are offering. So the way we look at in a very, I would say, layman's term is that we have created in this platform a lot of microservices, which are the bubbles that you see here on the screen. And what we basically do is that we, if our business comes back with a question or with a problem or with a need for our customer, what we do is we pick these microservices together and then we build a wrapper around it and we offer that as a solution to our customers. And that has been our innovation engine, that has been our digital engine, that has been our data-driven solution engine. And all these touch points, all these bubbles, all these microservices are generating their own data quite a lot. Some of them are generating customer data, some of them are generating product data, some of them are generating the usage data, and so on and so on. And so there is a lot of data sets that we have been capturing. And we were on this journey for last, I would say, 4 or 5 years. And then in that, we realized that of lately, we have the required technologies. We have the required data sets that we need. All this is on cloud. We have connected products. We have open APIs to collect all this data. And we have moved in some way, I would say, from the traditional BI world that we lived in, business intelligence world that we lived in 10 years ago, to this big data world that we live in today. Where the BI world was trying to collate all the data from different systems and then giving some sorts of dashboards and online analytical processing, the 3D cubes and so on, where you can slice and dice and take business decisions. But then the complexity of addition of public data set and also social data sets and different formats and domains of data sets has come in of lately. So for example, what if I want to combine pictures and videos and audio files with our traditional tables and relational databases and so on? And that is where I think we are, and that is where these microservices from digital perspective, for example, and connected products are throwing us towards the big data landscape that we are getting into. And Husqvarna has been no different, to be honest. But then the question comes that if we have all this data, and of course, there has been many challenges. For example, some of the challenges that we faced when we were doing this journey with data perspective was the challenges organizationally, with sourcing, with finance, with HR. So for example, our sourcing never wanted to sign SOWs with any vendors unless we know what are we going to achieve from such a collaboration. And in data science projects, in data-driven projects, we never knew what was the outcome. We wanted to explore the data and see what it tells us. Sometimes it gives us great insights, sometimes it doesn't. And that was a totally new way of working, to get approvals for your projects without SOWs, without knowing exactly what is going to come out from the project, for example. So we have been facing many challenges organizationally, approach-wise, but one of the challenges that we have been facing also is that how do we make sure that this big data that we have now created for ourselves, coming from various microservices, is not becoming a burden for us, but actually giving us wings to fly, giving us the capability, enabling our business to generate insights for our customers and for new products and services that we want to get into. But as I said, that we have had many challenges organizationally, but also I think from a data perspective, there has been many other challenges. For example, do we have enough data? Of course, when we are talking about deep learning, machine learning, and so on, the more the merrier. But if we have a lot of data, is that of the right quality? Can we trust the data? Is the sensor broken, for example? Or was the data aggregated at the incorrect level during capture and transmission, for example? Is the data the right representation of what we want to do? So for example, if we want to predict future failures, do we have the failure data captured, or do we just have the runtime of the machines captured, for example? Is the data rightly labeled? Do we even have access to the data? And of course, the question is, do we even have the data? Because sometimes, even though we have created so many microservices and we capture so much data from everywhere, but then we lack the relevant data that we are after for that specific use case. So what we have learned there is that no data is not a showstopper. We have to get on to this journey of creating these data sets, and governance can play a very major role for us in this journey of onboarding data sets within the company, and which I think and which we believe in Husqvarna is a prerequisite before we can tap into the real power of AI or any other technology from a data-driven perspective, for example. So how do we make sure that this big ops with big data doesn't become a big oops for us? How do we make sure that we have the right control on the information management, especially when we have so many distributed microservices, different kind of data sets? How do we have one view of data? How do we be in control when we have regulations like GDPR, like the DPAs, and these will become just more and more strict going forward? So of course, there are probably many ways of approaching this and solving this, but I was very keen to share with you guys one of the approaches that has really worked for us on the governance side when we talk about taking all this data with us into the next step. And the basic ideology for our governance approach has been that, if you see on the left top here, data, we all got a buy-in within Husqvarna with all the stakeholders that it will be a ticket to play. It will not be an advantage or a competitive edge for us. It will be a basic thing that we will need even to exist. And the traditional ways of governance will not work, because the data is growing many folds, customers' expectations are growing many folds, technology is going way too fast. Our traditional ways of governance would be rather too slow. And hence, we have to look into totally different approaches to data governance and quality, rather than the traditional steering committees and forums and networks that we normally create to have a better control of things. And that's why our data governance strategy within the data-driven solutions and services, which of course includes microservices, AI lab, and our data-driven ambitions, was that we wanted to focus on acceptance within the organization. That's the first thing, that whatever structure we come up with, let it be a distributed governance structure, hierarchical governance structure, it should be well accepted within the organizations. Then the second one is that it shall enable business units towards their journey and acceleration that they have to achieve as per the strategy. It should not hamper them. It should not slow them down. It should actually enable and accelerate them, and hence empower the stakeholders to identify future steps. And we do not want to be the bottlenecks. We want them to feel empowered so that they can take the future of the data driven themselves forward, rather than being dependent on us to define those governance models and so on, and hence accelerating our road towards implementation of the strategy. And the example that I want to show you today that we have tried to, or that we tried out, which has worked really well from governance standpoint, is that if you see here on the left, you see all those microservices pinching in data into our big data platform as we traditionally had. And then there were many consumers who wanted access to this data. And in order to make best sense and best output for our consumers, we came up with traditional ways that how can we slice and dice the data and store the data and view the data in different ways for our consumers on the right. It could be based on different sessions, it could be based on different domains, it could be based on different regions or hierarchies. It could be so many different ways. And we tried that for the first couple of years, but then it became rather too complex. And the central team here, which was managing this big data, was becoming more and more bottleneck, because consumers on the right side always wanted a new view, an updated view. And we were not able to keep up with all these new requirements and new data sets coming from the left all the time. And hence, the model that we worked on towards was what we sometimes refer to as data mesh. And what I mean by data mesh is that all the microservices who were now pitching in data into the data lake, into the central lake, they don't have to do that anyways. What they have to do is that they have to make their data sets open through these APIs so that it can be shared by and to others. And one of the biggest advantage that we upfront came up with this was ownership. Because all of a sudden, all these microservices who were producing this data, they own their data. They define their what we call minimal viable quality, MVQ, because you cannot be good at everything. And one microservice might want to work on certain quality aspects. The other might want to work on some other quality aspects. The granularity for their data sets can be very different. The ownership, as I said, is very different. We cannot hold a central big data team responsible for all the data sets coming from all the sources into the big data lake. We don't have the domain knowledge of all those data sets. So what we said was that under data mesh, we will let the owners and the microservices which are producing this data to be the owners for the data. We, from a global team perspective at global governance and open standards, will generate some principles of interoperability. So for example, if you are generating a data set, you have to adhere to these standards. You have to make them open, you have to make them public, you have to adhere to this minimal viable quality, you have to create a data registry for it, and so on and so on. And then we give you, in the bottom part of the picture that you see, we give you the required data infrastructure and the platform so that you can create and publish your data sets. And then the owners, the microservices, be their own owners of the data. They decide what to publish, when to publish, how to publish. But then once it is, then it is owing to the standards which are laid out by the governance standards. And then these microservices have data stewards within them who ensure that they are providing their data sets with the required granularity by the other services. So sometimes you have to drive your data set not just based on what you need, but based on what others need. So here you see a very, I would say, decentralized governance where we concentrate on accelerating the microservices and the business units rather than being a bottleneck, but at the same time getting a central view of how and what data is playing a major role in our data-driven strategy ambitions, for example. So we in this setup, for example, can very easily say that, let's say, service A data is the most used data, or service X data is the most quality conscious data that we have been able to achieve. And then the access, the pipelining, the cataloging, and the storage, all of those things are managed by a central infrastructure team, for example. And what benefits does it drive for us? And I think it drives benefit not only from a company, from the whole Husqvarna group perspective, but it also drives a lot of benefits from the individual product teams, these data-driven teams that we have. So from a company perspective, I think the first and foremost that I think we were able to achieve was these ownership. We really were struggling to identify and have the right owners. And the reason was because the data was created somewhere else, captured by someone else, and used by someone else. And who is the owner here? And now we say all of this happens within the same service, within the same domain, microservice as we call it. So ownership, we really had a big boost there. And because of ownership, the data quality really went up many folds. And now we do not put the same quality measures to the two services, which are very different from each other, for example. So they define their data quality measures and measure them, their data sets on those qualities. So the quality actually went up very fast. And that, because these data sets were readily available, our innovations, our testing and verifying different data sets, combining them with pattern assessments and analysis that we do in the lab actually increased quite a lot. And of course, and hence contributing to the overall strategy, both from a lab testing verification, but also from industrializing and making data-driven a success for our business from both perspectives, actually. And then on the squad level, on the team level, they had better pipelines, they could share the data, they could analyze data, not only for themselves, but also reflecting upon the other data sets and coagulating it together, and hence building more intelligent and AI services from data-driven approach, for example. So it's a journey as we see for us. We have just started that journey, I would say, when, in this scale, if you ask me personally, we at Husqvarna Group are maybe at 1 or maybe 2, but then we have to really constantly push ourselves towards 4 and 5. So just to give you in a nutshell, 0, 1, 2 is where humans are taking the decisions still. In 0, we have no inputs from data perspective, but in phase 1, we start to get some inputs from data, some support. But in number 2, we get actually some good recommendations from AI, but humans still take the decision. But in number 3, 4, and 5 in this journey, you would see that AI starts to take decisions more and more, and human monitors in number 3. And in number 4, it actually doesn't even monitor. AI and the data-driven technologies monitor, but human just decides how to proceed. And then in number 5, actually, when the data-driven services starts to work independently. So I think in this journey, our approach has been that governance is going to play a major role. It could actually enable or disable our ambitions with the data-driven strategy. It could also either hamper or accelerate us many folds as well. And that's why I think one of the approaches that we spoke about for governance today, which really worked out for Husqvarna, but I will be very interested to hear in your thoughts and inputs. And we are definitely far from the brink of technology. It's an exciting future ahead that we look forward to, and what role governance could play in that. Thank you so much for listening in. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them, and I will see how much can I pick and answer you. Thank you so much for listening in today.